just like in the early days of racing, you drive your car to the track, paint numbers on it with shoe polish, tape over the headlights, race it, and then if you were lucky, drive it home.
Welcome to another episode of Jay Leno's Garage. This week, something a little bit different. I was at a Cars and Coffee event a while back, and a bunch of guys are standing around a Pontiac Trans-Am, and somebody said, what does Trans-Am mean anyway? And I realized, to a whole generation, they don't really know what Trans-Am racing was really all about. When I was a kid, it was like the coolest thing out there. So I brought in a couple of experts. Let's meet them now. Gentlemen, come on in. Mike Joy, legendary announcer for Fox Sports. He does all the play-by-play on the NASCAR races. Been doing it since you were a college kid, right?
I started at Riverside Park in Agawam, Mass. in 1970 doing public address.
There you go. See, he's even got the voice for it. Doing public address. See, they got that whole thing. And Ken Epsman, he is a historic racer. That doesn't mean he's really old. That means he races historic cars. He might be old, but we're all old, so that's all right. But this is our era. This is really an exciting time. To me, the great thing about this era was the cars that were raced were cars you could buy. See, I grew up in the 60s, and when you watch NASCAR, Ford had the big 427 Sidearm, Chevy had the Rat motor. You know, everybody raced what they had, and it was really exciting to see which team would win. Of course, the Hemis came in and all that kind of stuff. Then everything sort of changed. They started using all the same motors. This harkens back to that era, and it goes from what, 66 to 72? Is that right, gentlemen?
That's correct.
Okay, so tell us exactly what a Trans-Am race car was.
Well, in 1966, when John Bishop and the Sports Car Club of America created a Pro Series for sedans, it was just that. The cars were very, very stock. You got to remove the carpet and the headliner, but the back seat, the side windows, all that had to stay. You'd build in a roll cage, 305 cubic inch limit for the V8 powered cars, 2-liter limit for the 4-cylinder cars, and eventually they'd split into 2 series. But in '66, local racers could upgrade their license to Pro to run with the factory teams if they had an A sedan or a B sedan category SCCA car. And it was called the Trans-American Challenge Series. And when Pontiac created their Trans-Am in '69, they paid the SCCA a bounty of $5 per car to use the name. And for decades, that was the largest single source of income that the Sports Car Club had.
Well, that's fascinating, you know, because I remember when they built the 440 instead of the Hemi because it was $5 an engine cheaper to build it. And you guys paying $5 for a name. That was
just for the name.
That was a lot of money. Okay.
Well, the Trans-Am was the biggest stock-bodied racing series in America. NASCAR was big in the Southeast at the time, but the SCCA Trans-Am was what was written up in all the car magazines. They tested all the cars. They covered all the races. And we had the best drivers. We had Parnelli Jones and Mark Donohue and Jim Hall and Peter Revson and George Fulmer. Everybody wanted to race. Dan Gurney. Everybody wanted to race in the Trans-Am.
Now, Ken, when you were did you race back in the day? Were you too young?
No, I was not too young, but I couldn't afford it. I did not race back in the day, and got into cars when you're 16 and you start building model cars. Then when you think you can afford one, you go buy one and step it up from there.
Right. Okay. So you really entered the Trans-Am racing from the historic angle.
Correct.
Okay. Never did it back in period. Okay. So that must have been kind of fun when they instituted that whole. How old is the historic racing of Trans-Am cars?
In 1990, Jim Shane, the outgoing promoter at Lime Rock Park, and restorer David Tom put together a group of 20 Trans-Am race cars. I was the incoming promoter at Lime Rock Park, and we ran that race in 1990. And so that was 20 years from the big year, 1970. That was the first so-called historic Trans-Am event, but it was a one-shot. It was a one-off, and it really grew legs with you fellows on the West Coast.
It was in '92, Steve Earle of Monterey Historics fame.
Oh, sure.
Steve gave us a chance to do it at Wine Country Classic at Sonoma. So we gathered about 20 cars. We went out and had a great time. Then he invited us to the Monterey Historics, and it grew from there, and more guys started buying them.
Yeah, because it seems to make sense. That it seems like the final iteration of race on Sunday, sell on Monday, because you could go to a race on Sunday and see your car or your buddy, whichever one they had. Everybody had their own team, and you could actually buy that car. You really can't get close to buying, quote, a race car anymore.
No. The first car I bought with my own money, Jay, was a 71 Z28 Camaro that I bought when it was 2 years old, and I wanted that exact model because that's what Chevrolet was racing in the Trans-Am series.
Right, right.
Yeah.
That's good. And that had the 302.
That would have had the 350. They went to the LT1 350 in 1970, but to race these cars, they had to be D-stroke 2, 302, 5-liter limit is all that was allowed in the race car.
Were they limited to 4-speed transmissions, or could you have a 5-speed?
No, stock 4-speed transmission.
Oh, but
there were a lot of stock components in these cars,
right,
and some not so stock in others that we'll get to in a little bit.
Oh, all right, all right. Yeah, well, the cheating seems to be a big part of it, too.
Oh, like Junior Johnson said, it's only cheating if you get caught.
Right, right, right. Because I remember reading Unfair Advantage. That was Mark Donahue's. And that is interesting. You know, they came here to borrow some of my cars for the Gran Turismo game, the car game. And they set up the Camaro in the Gran Turismo game from Mark Donahue's instructions of Unfair Advantage. And a guy said who raced, you know, the video game, set his car up exactly like Mark, and he won.
Yeah.
Because so that's how close they were, you know, to keeping it accurate. Well, very cool. So where do you want to start?
Well, I think to show the development of the series during its golden age, we probably best start at the beginning.
All right, let's go to the Mustang. I always thought that little badge that said High Performance 289 was the sexiest badge. I just wonder if little things like that have an effect on modern young enthusiasts the way they did when we were kids.
Sure. Didn't we used to all go out and roll Saturday night, and we'd be at the stoplight Grand Prix, we'd be looking at fenders, and we'd be looking for badges and looking for clues or cheater slicks or who had what.
Right.
Yeah, that was important.
Now, Ken, this is your car?
That's correct.
Okay. So how long have you been racing this one?
This one probably only had about 8 or 10 years.
Okay. Was it a race car when you bought it?
This car, from day one, the guy bought it and he raced it. When we've got great history with it. All the fueling and the fuel cap and everything that he bought from Shelby, we've got the invoices for from the day.
Okay. Now, Shelby himself, Shelby could not race the GT350, right? Because it didn't have a back seat. Is that correct?
Yeah, when Shelby made the GT350, he wanted to race it, but John Bishop at SCCA said you can't race it in Trans-Am, can't race it in a sedan. They said, why don't you take the back seat out? Now you have a 2-seat sports car, you know, like the AMX, let's say, and you can run it in B production, and that's what they did with the Shelby. But of course, if you take the body off, there's little difference between your GT350 and these more pedestrian Mustangs.
Right. So which would have been more advantageous to Shelby, to race in this class or stick a back seat in it, or with the back seat out as a sports car? Because it seems like the competition would be heavier in the sports car, correct?
It was different. Yeah, B production had a lot of other makes to contend with and different formulas. But Shelby also raced Trans-Am, and raced with Mustangs with Jerry Titus in the Trans-Am series, in the professional series.
So what modifications? You got to keep the back seat, you got to keep discs in front, drums in back. That has to stay, correct?
Factory brakes.
Can you change cam, pistons, things like that, or does that have to be stock?
It's supposed to be. You're supposed to buy everything from out of the parts catalog.
Oh, okay. So if there's a high performance cam available, if it's in the parts catalog, you can get it.
If it had a Ford part number on it, you could use it.
Because I remember the 271 horsepower from Ford and 306 horsepower from Shelby was the most you could get out of the 289. How much horsepower would this race with?
What are you claiming, Kenny?
Well, today it makes pretty close to 400.
Oh, it makes 400. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's is it still 289 or is it 302?
It's a 289.
Oh, it's a 289. Okay. And what? Different cam?
It's got the original GT40 heads on it.
Oh, okay.
From back in the day.
Oh, okay. Was that legal?
Had a Ford part number.
Part number.
Oh, it had a Ford part. Okay. All right, let's see. Okay, I think I get it. Don't play poker with these guys, okay? Okay. You're just going to get screwed. Okay. Well, to me, and you know, I always liked this car because this was the best looking version of the Mustang. Usually the first generation of almost any car is always my favorite because it's what the designer envisioned and they just get it right. And then they make change for the sake of change because, well, you have to change it every year. I don't know why that's the law, but you know, it sort of is. So yeah, it's a good looking car and it's a notchback obviously rather than a fastback. I guess there's no disadvantage to that, really.
Well, the fastback, again, because that was the B production Shelby.
Right.
The 2+2 was not eligible to race in Trans-Am.
Okay, so stock steering box.
Yeah, manual steering on this one,
Okay.
and a lot of caster. This thing is an arm twister.
Right. Okay.
Turn 9 at Laguna Seca, and I've driven this car. I'm hanging over. My head's over in the passenger seat.
Wow. Okay.
Trying to wrestle this thing.
Yeah.
But it's fun.
Okay. Yeah, they're just great. I've got a GT350, car number 120, and it's just so much fun to drive with the Detroit lock. Does this have the Detroit locker rear end?
This has a locker.
And it's like every time you go on a corner, it's breaking a chicken bone. Crack!
Click, click, click.
You keep thinking, it's not click, it's like, gee, what broke? Yeah. I drive that thing on the street, and I take it up the crest, and I come around, and I crack! I go, uh-oh.
And when it does that and you nail it, it just wants to go straight. It doesn't want to turn anymore.
Yeah,
I tell people, it's like riding a snowmobile. Yeah. You grab a handful of throttle, and all that thing wants to do is go straight. That's driving this.
Well, let's take a look at this motor. I always thought this was one of the sexiest motors when you got the Ford dress-up kit with it and all the other stuff. Okay, so there it is. Plenty of easy access to everything. And when I was a kid, these seemed so complicated. Compared to modern cars, now you go, oh, look, distributor's right there. There's your alternator. I mean, yeah, boy.
Tony Otto does the engines for these, and you can see this thing has a huge sump because dry sumps were not allowed, so all the oil had to be contained in the oil pan. And
oh, you couldn't run a dry sump?
No, sir, not until '72.
Okay. What is it? 12 quarts?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And this bar here is factory, lots of factory parts.
Yeah,
right?
this is what they put on the shelves. What they call the Monte Carlo bars.
Right, I always talk about it because I got a 63.5 Falcon Sprint, and that came in 37th out of 400 and something cars at a rally in France, and that was considered so good for just a cheap economy car that they put the brace in and called the Monte Carlo bar. Okay, let's move on to car number 2. That'd be your car, the Camaro, correct?
Right. So this moves us up 4 years to 1970.
Now, Mike, this is your car, correct?
It is. I purchased this from Ron Treadway, who spent a decade restoring it. Jay, this takes us to 1970, which was the big year of the Trans Am. Every pony car maker had a factory team. The Jim Hall Chaparral team with Camaros, Dan Gurney's All-American Racers with Cudas, Sam Posey with the Dodge Challenger, Mark Donahue and Peter Revson in the AMC Javelins, Jerry Titus in the Firebird, Parnelli Jones and George Fulmer for Bud Moore. The best drivers in America raced in Trans Am. And so this car was a semi-factory team. Tony DiLorenzo, whose dad was a GM vice president, and Jerry Thompson, who was an engineer on these chassis, built a 2-car team, an outgrowth of their successful Owens Corning Corvette SCCA race team, and they built 2 of these cars. I had a press pass from my college radio station at the race where this car debuted in 1970. Still have the press kit from that day. Press kit didn't have any pictures of the cars because the cars weren't finished. They just barely got this one to the track, and then the second one came along a couple weeks later. But the Jim Hall Chaparral team and GM Engineering wrote a book on how to build these cars for Trans Am racing, and so this is pretty much a textbook example with even the GM supplied die-cast steel fender flares that they had stamped for all these cars, and some really trick lowered front spindles that only the Trans Am cars got. Chevrolet offered 2 front-end designs on the Camaro road car. This is the standard front end with the full-width chrome bumper. Right. They also had the Rally Sport nose, which moved the parking light up into a round European-looking light here, and then had a soft rubber Endura nose with steel bracing on the front. A lot of the street fellows prefer the Rally Sport, which could be gotten on any Camaro.
Right.
They raced this one because it's lighter.
Right.
And the last thing that a Camaro needed was more road-hugging weight over the front end.
Right.
So the race cars all had this one, and when I bought my street car, that's what I wanted. Not a Rally Sport. I wanted the one they raced.
Cool. Now, Ken, did you ever drive this car?
I have not driven this one yet.
Okay. How do you think it compares to your Mustang?
Mike drove them both. How do they compare?
Well, number one, this car has power steering.
Oh, okay.
And for somebody of my age, that is a huge, huge benefit.
Right.
Power steering with a 12-to-1 box. So in that case, it's a lot easier for me to get around. I like the handling dynamic of this car better than the Mustang. His partner Jimmy Hague ran the Mustang though a couple of races ago and waxed any lap time I ever did in it. So guess could be more me than the car.
So this is a 350 block D-stroke down to 302. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, let's see what she looks like under the hood.
So boosted power brakes, again a wet sump, your power steering pump and box here.
Did you lose a fan belt?
We had a little difficulty getting the alternator belt to line up.
Oh, okay.
So Chris Drysdale, who preps the car for me, left it off. He said, what would you rather have, battery or power steering? I said, power steering.
Oh, okay.
So that's the belt that stayed, and the other one's off, and we'll get to that. GM did a lot of research, starting with smoky unit for cowl induction. So that's what all of these cars evolved to. But still, most all the panels here are stock.
Right.
Some of them have been massaged a little bit to widen out to the allowable track limit. And this car has a Chevy Impala rear end because that was wider than the Camaro rear end.
Oh, okay.
And with the bodywork modified to suit.
And your cowl induction is here or
Right there.
Right here.
Yep.
Okay. I see. It's pulling it into the air cleaner here.
Yeah, from the base of the windshield. Yes.
As opposed to running a scoop. Could you not have run a scoop?
The cars didn't have scoops from the factory, so no.
Okay, so it didn't have it from the factory. You can't have it.
Didn't have it,
Okay.
you can't do it.
Okay, but it didn't have cowl induction, but it did have.
The street car did not have that. The street car had a dual snorkel.
Right, but what I mean,
dual inlet here.
but this was here already to bring cool air into the cockpit. I mean, you're using it for cowl induction.
Yes, because the hole in the firewall that's used there is where the heater core would have been.
I see.
On a road car.
Okay, very good. Okay.
Yeah.
And to me, the most interesting car, only because it's the least known and probably, I think it's probably unknown to anybody under 40 years old, the Javelin right over here. I would say most people have no idea what this is. You know, I met a guy the other day who was a Chevy guy, never heard of Corvair, because he was like 25 years old. He thought it was a Carmen Gear. I said, no, this is a real, really? It was just out of his wheelhouse, you know. He hadn't read it. Wasn't a historical guy, he just liked modern cars. He didn't know what it was. Now, I remember the Javelin, but didn't this have this had what, a 401 engine in it, correct?
They came with 6 cylinders, they came with 304s, 401s, 360s. They had all sorts of options for this thing.
But this one has the 401.
This one has a 401 block de-stroked again to a 304.
But they made a 304 already, right? Was that block not strong enough? What was the reason why they de-stroked as opposed to going to this?
That engine wasn't strong enough, and I believe the bore-to-stroke ratio was optimized for economy car, not optimized for a race car.
Okay. Well, this is American Motors. Is it fair to say they probably had the least amount of money to put into racing?
Roger Penske told me that when AMC agreed to write them that check in 1970 for $1 million, that completely turned around and made Team Penske. That was the beginning of the juggernaut that became Team Penske, was when AMC stepped up.
So now $1 million to get you wheels and maybe a set of tires.
Yeah.
You know, but back then it was like that movie, $1 million. It was like a huge, oh my gosh, $1 million. And these were true competitors, weren't they? They really did well. A little bigger car. I think it's a longer wheelbase than either Mustang or the Camaro. Is it me or is that just an illusion? Is it a little bigger?
I think it's an illusion.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Okay, it's about the same size. Okay.
Yeah, these are mostly 108s. The Dodge Challenger was 2 inches longer than the Cuda, but not so much. But this has a lot of Mark Donohue engineering, unfair advantage engineering in it.
Right. Yeah, I just find these fascinating. I like the paint scheme, the red, white, and blue, and they just seem like the little guy at the race. You know, Ford was a conglomerate. GM, of course, the biggest corporation in the world at the time, and then hi AMC, how you doing there?
Yeah, these were the little guys.
Yeah, well, and plus they also built economy cars. And this was sort of a new area for AMC, a performance image. They had the AMX, which was a fantastic looking car. You know, a few other things. So yeah, it's cool. It's kind of interesting. Very nice.
So a couple noteworthy things here. If you look in under the dash on this side, you'll find the brake booster.
Oh, I see, right there. Yeah.
Well, which normally would be located up under the hood. What's up with that?
This was something that Penske was able to do. Penske was able to manipulate the rules. So the calipers that are on this car are they're basically 917 Porsche calipers. However, they were available in the AMC catalog, over the counter. Every AMC dealer said they never sold a pair.
That's so funny.
They never got them, but there was an AMC part number.
There's an
on
AMC
there.
part number on them.
So it's really Porsche. Okay.
So
Well,
it's got power assist fronts and manual rears.
Well, let's open the hood on this one too, and let's take a look. You'll see the block is much bigger than the others.
So what happened on this car, Penske was able to manipulate the rules to where they were able to use a dry sump oiling system.
Oh, they could.
The dry,
1972.
Okay.
the dry sump had to be under the hood, so if you look right there,
Oh, right here, right
you had
where
to
the
be able to
brake
access it
booster
under the hood.
is. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So what that enabled Penske to do is lower the motor, move it back in the chassis for better weight distribution.
And which of these cars had the most horsepower of the three? This one here.
By far.
What was the horsepower on this?
This was about 490.
Really? Wow. Okay. So.
Which from 5 liters back then
Yes, that's it.
was unbelievable. And
Yeah.
thinking more about the engine size question, that 304, much like Chevy had a 305 small block,
Right.
and it was an economy dog motor because it was a small bore, long stroke
Right.
for economy. These things needed to rev to what?
You really can't rev them over 7,500, but they got a boatload of torque.
Yeah.
Big bore, short stroke.
And how many races did AMC win? How competitive were they compared to Ford and Chevy?
This car was built in 1970. It was in 1970. Penske built it. They finished second in the championship. They won quite a few races. They had oiling problems early on. That's when in 71 Penske got the rules changed. 71 they changed it to dry sump. Right. So Penske built one car for himself in 71, gave the other 2 chassis to Roy Wood and said, if we wreck our primary car, we can take one of those back. Donahue cleaned up the field with the one Javelin, never had an incident, made the whole season.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
So
Well,
Donahue won the championship in 71, and George Fulmer and Roy Woods with this car in 72.
so this is the winning car itself. Yeah. Very cool. Well, I heard this one come in. It's way too loud. We won't get 10 feet on the street with this one. And this is pretty much the same thing. The Mustang's probably the closest to, quote, stock of the three. Is that fair to say?
Closest to
Very
being a
fair.
street car, yes.
Yeah, that'll get us. I don't know how far we'll get. If we go past the cop, we're in trouble. But, well, thanks for lending us your car. Thanks for bringing it. Both of you, thank you. Let me thank you. I don't know how loud this is going to be, if we're going to be able to talk, so we'll find out. But it's really fascinating picking up that history, because it is fun when I talk to young people. They just don't. They kind of heard about Trans-Am. They just don't know what it represented or what it meant, you know. So
Well, now it's kind of consigned to history. I
Yeah,
mean, people out here are talking about the Busch Clash of the Coliseum that we're going to do on Fox at the 1st of February.
Right.
And then the Daytona 500 and the rest of the NASCAR season. So, but when these cars come out on the track and start making the big noise, everybody stops what they're doing and pays attention.
well, good. Well, let's go make some noise. Ken, thank you very much for letting us
Thank
borrow
you.
your car. Let's give it a shot. Well, I suppose it's a natural progression from Trans-Am to NASCAR. It's all racing, isn't it? So, pretty much. But Trans-Am's kind of your hobby, and NASCAR is your vocation. Is that fair to say?
I don't know. It's kind of like the Tonight Show was your job and stand-up was your passion.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
it similar?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say.
You know,
yeah, that's pretty good.
My heart is right here.
Right.
But my profession has been calling NASCAR for these many years, and this year will be my 45th Daytona 500 for either
Wow.
radio or TV. And we all kick it off over here at the LA Coliseum. We're going to run NASCAR cars inside the Coliseum in the Busch Clash for the 2nd year. We'll do that first weekend of February. And then the Daytona 500 on Fox in mid-February to kick off a big season.
Cool, cool. And you'll be at Daytona this year?
Yes, sir. Wouldn't miss it.
Well, let's go. Let's take.
If I survive this ride,
Let's see
yes.
what happens.
It's sweet. Yep. We ran these around the old Grand Prix course at Watkins Glen.
Yeah.
On the public roads.
Yeah.
They did just great.
Right.
A little bit of tow out, so it wants to dart wherever it plants. it's like in the early days of racing. You drive your car to the track, paint numbers on it with shoe polish, tape over the headlights, race it, and then if you were lucky, drive it home.
Yeah, that was always my favorite era. The last, I think, Le Mans car that was capable of doing that was the F1 McLaren. That was a road car. They converted it to racing spec, but that's the last sort of road car. I love the 50s when the Jags would drive to the track.
Oh, yes. Yep. Win on Sunday, drive it to work on Monday.
Well, racing's like movies. Sometimes the money can ruin it.
Yeah.
You know, when you use your imagination and, you know, whenever I would talk with Sterling Moss, he made no money, but boy, they had a lot of fun.
Yeah, right.
You know, guys acting stupid after the race.
You know, that was the thing. I got to meet a lot of the guys from that period, and I thought they were all rich and famous.
Yeah,
no, they were just famous.
I mean, Phil Hill raced for fuel and tires.
Yeah.
I mean, you raced for Ferrari, you paid your own airfare. I mean, it's awful.
Wow. Back to Lime Rock and Watkins Glen this year, the first time they'd been there in 6 years. When they fired up on the grid like this, the whole paddock, everybody just stopped what they were doing, put their tools down, walked over to the fence to watch. All the thunder.
And it's funny because they weren't even the biggest motors.
No, 305 limit. That's right. And a good thing, because if you'd put 700 horsepower in these, there's nothing the chassis could do with it.
Right.
They're not that sophisticated. So that's my two favorite days of the year. The Daytona 500 and Saturday at the Monterey Historics when we roll these things out to race.
Yeah.
That's it. Oh, and my anniversary.
How long have you been married?
25 years next month.
25?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm 43. I got you.
Wow. Well done.
Like a kind of snowball wagon.
Yeah. Well, what you're feeling, there's a little toe out, so every little bump, it's going to want to drag the car that way.
Well, you realize, you know, cars have always been fast, even since the early teens. It's getting them to stop and go around corners.
Yes.
That's where the real science is.
You can really feel when this starts to come on the cam.
Yeah. I always say when I drive cars in this era, this is the halfway point in the development of the automobile.
Yes.
In 1910, then you go to 65. From 65 to now, this is just about the halfway mark.
Yep.
And the improvements from 1910 to 65 are unbelievable. All kinds of cars.
Yeah. Oh, it pulls. Yep.
No stranger thing.
Wait till we get you up at Sonoma.
Oh, yeah. Does this even have brake lights?
Oh, yeah. It's a rule. They're required. No horn, no signals,
No horn.
but brake lights are a rule.
You can't have a horn, or
Well, you could,
Oh,
but
no.
who's going to hear it?
right? Well, I have no idea whether folks at home can hear us right now, so we pulled off the side and I shut it down. Mike, thank you for bringing this piece of history to educating people on Trans-Ams, and it's really exciting. I remember when it happened, but it's 50 years ago, and it's just as exciting now as it was back then. And this thing is so much fun to drive. I don't know if anybody heard anything that we said, but I just say thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. I know you got a split, so I'm going to take this back to the garage and have some fun. So thank you, my friend.
I'm going to go get studied up for NASCAR on Fox.
Oh, that's
right. But boy, this is my passion, and I can't wait till we can get you up to Sonoma and get you behind the wheel in anger of a couple of these and have some fun.
We will do this, and I'll be listening for you at Daytona.
Great.
Thanks,
you,
my
Jay.
friend. All right.
Mm-hmm.